There are stories in the Bible that are either strange or they're just funny. One such story is what happens when the Ark of the Covenant is taken out into battle against the Philistines. Well, the Philistines capture the Ark and then take it back to the temple of Dagon. And the Ark of the Covenant is then placed in the house of Dagon, a prominent god of the Philistines. When the people of Ashdod come the next day, to their shock, they discover that the statue of Dagon is now face down before the Ark of Yahweh. So they put the statue back into its place, but when they return the second day, the statue is once again face down before the Ark of Yahweh, only this time the head of Dagon as well as his hands are cut off, and they've been laid on the threshold of Dagon's temple. And it's here that we read a very telling sentence. That is why to this day neither the priest of Dagon nor anyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod will step on its threshold. No one, the priest, no one was willing to step or to cross over the threshold of Dagon's temple. Why? Well, these priests now know that this turf, that is where this temple lies, it now belongs to Yahweh. The ground of Dagon's temple is under the dominion of Yahweh, and Dagon's priests know, and they are not taking any chances. So what you're reading here is a prime example of the cosmic geographical worldview of ancient people. Cosmic geography is simply the idea that certain ground was holy. That is, it belonged to Yahweh, while other ground is unholy. That is, under the dominion of hostile spiritual beings. And in the Bible, the land of Israel was holy because the presence of Yahweh was there. But in 1 Samuel 5, the Ark of Yahweh, after it's been captured, has been placed in the temple of Dagon. And the body of Dagon's idol facing the Ark of the Covenant with its head and its hands cut off, lying on the threshold, indicate that this turf, that is the turf of Dagon's temple, it now belongs to Yahweh, and Dagon's priest knew that. The priests of Dagon were not about to step on the threshold of Dagon's temple. They knew they would die if they dared tread on that threshold. So here's the question. How does the idea of cosmic geography come about? Where does this idea that certain ground is holy while other ground is unholy, that is, under the dominion of hostile spiritual beings? And even more compelling, where does the god Dagon, as well as the other gods of the Old Testament, where do they come from? These gods are prominent throughout the Old Testament. Even Abraham, the father of our faith, called by God, this individual came from a family that worshiped other gods. How does that happen? Well, these gods are obviously a serious problem. You can't help but notice that when you're reading in the Old Testament. In fact, they are such a serious problem that Yahweh's first of 10 commandments for the Israelites is that they are to have no other gods before them. They are to create no idols. You must not have any other God but me, Yahweh tells them. And let me just state, if these gods were imaginary, why would Yahweh be concerned? And again, Yahweh clearly sees the possibility of Israel worshiping these gods, so much so that he tells them in the book of Deuteronomy, you must not worship any of the gods of neighboring nations, for the Lord your God who lives among you is a jealous God. His anger will flare up against you, and he will wipe you from the face of the earth. These gods, these divine beings, were real, and they proved to be a very serious temptation for Israel. The most prominent sin that you read about in the Old Testament concerning Israel was idolatry. It's throughout. They would be unfaithful to Yahweh time and time again. So Who are these gods, and where do they come from? Well, the origin of the gods begins with a very common story that really is not understood. It's the Tower of Babel story that you find in Genesis chapter 11. After the flood, God wanted Noah's descendants to multiply and to spread out over the earth. In other words, God is giving to Noah and his family the same mandate, if you will, that God gave to Adam and Eve. They are to multiply and then spread out because they are his imagers. So, like Adam and Eve, they were to be God's co-workers to maintain creation. But Noah's descendants chose instead to come together and to build a tower to their own glory. We read in Genesis 11, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves." Now, to be honest with you, for many Bible readers, this tower building story is just seen as a hapless construction project that actually was never finished. The whole affair ends with the language of the people being confused and then these same people being scattered over the face of the earth. And for most people, that's the end of the story. Nothing more here to see. Well, not so fast. There is actually far more to see in this ill-fated project. The real significance of the Tower of Babel story is found in two unfamiliar verses in another book of the Bible. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 32. Let me read you these two verses, 8 and 9. "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage." These two verses reveal that one of the judgments of the Tower of Babel was the division of humankind. Up until this point in the Bible story, God's just dealing with humanity as one whole, one collective whole. But all of that changed at Babel. Humans were segregated by language and geography. Borders were drawn and nations were formed. This is God's doing. You no longer have just one group of people. You now have a world that is made up of nations with their own languages. But there's more to this story. Yahweh will divorce himself from humanity. After he divides mankind by language and geography with the formation of these nations, note carefully what Deuteronomy 32:8 states next. Yahweh fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now look at that. Yahweh fixed the borders. That is, these borders of the nations that he created, of the peoples that he scattered. He's put them in language groups, and he's done so according to the number of the sons of God. Yahweh has assigned to each nation a member of his supernatural family, the sons of God. Yahweh is disinheriting these people, and what he's essentially saying to them, enough. If you do not want me to be your God, then I'll assign you to some of my heavenly family, the sons of God. Now, these sons of God, these lesser divine beings, were to be caretakers of these nations. That's what they were originally designed to be. And they were to rule, these nations with justice because, Yahweh still loves humanity. But these supernatural beings, these supernatural sons of God, they did a lousy job. We are told we're not told how long it took, but we do know that these divine beings that God had assigned to each of these nations that he formed, they failed. They became corrupt. They became so corrupt that God had to judge them. This is what you read in Psalm 82. It begins, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? These sons of God had enslaved humanity. They had divided them and made their lives miserable. Worse yet, they had turned the hearts of the people to idolatry. These lesser divine beings caused the people to worship them. Humanity is now tied to other gods. And as a result, these members of God's supernatural family would be judged, and they would have their immortality taken away from them. Again, reading in Psalm 82, God says, "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince." The rebellion of these members of God's supernatural family explains where the gods of the nations originated. The foreign gods of these nations that are around Israel are the corrupt sons of God that Yahweh had originally assigned to the nations that He formed at Babel. Deuteronomy 32 revealed that Yahweh had given these nations their inheritance, which is land. That is the land, the borders created around these sections of land that form these nations. He established the boundaries of these nations, and then He assigned a Son of God to rule over the people living within those established boundaries on those particular pieces of land. That was their inheritance. And Deuteronomy 32 then tells us that Yahweh's inheritance is His people. That is the people of Israel who would live in Canaan, the promised land. This land was holy because this land belonged to Yahweh. All other ground around Israel, that is the ground that belonged to these nations, it was unholy. This idea that one piece of land is holy and another is unholy is what the Bible understands as cosmic geography. The ground Yahweh controlled is holy, while the ground that is under the dominion of hostile spiritual beings is not holy. This, my friends, is the story of this Old Testament, which has its origins at Babel in Genesis 11, that tower building story. It was God's decision to disinherit the nations and drew up the battle lines, and this will create a cosmic turf war that you read over and over again throughout the Old Testament. Israel standing against all these various nations and the gods that ruled over these nations, the gods that these people served, they're coming against Israel. The corruption of the sons of God set over the nations meant that Yahweh's vision of global Eden would be met with divine force. And indeed, it was met with divine force. In fact, every inch outside of Israel would be contested, and Israel itself was fair game for hostile conquest, that is. This is what you're reading in the Old Testament. These gods would not surrender their inheritance back to Yahweh. Yahweh would have to reclaim them. And this is why Israel was a holy nation. That is, a nation that was sacred, set apart for God. These people, these descendants of Abraham, of whom God blessed and said that Abraham would be a blessing to the families of the earth. Well, in time, the original intent was that these people that would later become the nation of Israel, they would be a light in the midst of darkness. They, by virtue of God blessing them, would be so much so that the nations around them would be drawn to come back. But of course, we know that's not what happened. By the way, side note, these hostile gods, oh yeah, they're ruling. But you remember when Jesus died? He was buried and rose again the third day, and then He ascended to the right hand of the Father, far above all dominions and powers, the rulers. These terms, dominions, powers, rulers, these are geographical rule terms. And what it's showing is that now the authority of these gods that they had, the rule that they had over the nations, they didn't have it anymore. That authority was gone because Jesus was now ruling far above them at the right hand of God. Ooh, there's so much more to that, but I just wanted to drop that in. All right, coming back to our story in 1 Samuel 5, where the Ark of the Covenant has been placed in the temple of Dagon, the god of the Philistines, what we're seeing is cosmic geography at work. It seems strange. Now, it can be funny because this statue keeps falling over, but actually there's far more going on here. The Ark of the Covenant is sitting on the turf of a hostile god. But that god, Dagon, is no match for Yahweh. And what you're seeing in this particular story in 1 Samuel 5 is the outcome. Now, before I wrap up this video, let me just clear up some confusion that some of you might have when you're reading Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, particularly verse 8. In some translations, like the NIV, and I know a lot of you like the NIV, it's a great translation, but when you read Deuteronomy 32:8, this is what you read. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. Most of your English translations do not read according to the sons of God, but rather they read according to the number of the sons of Israel. Now you may be asking, well, wait a minute, what gives here? Well, the difference derives from disagreements between manuscripts of the Old Testament. That is, the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've been reading from the ESV, which takes advantage of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in 1947, they are the oldest Hebrew manuscript material that we have today. And they read, without question, sons of God, not sons of Israel, sons of God. And as a result, the correct reading is now understood as the sons of God, not the sons of Israel. This reading, sons of God, makes far more sense than sons of Israel. The sons of Israel were not even in existence when Yahweh disinherited the nations at Babel. And it makes no sense for Yahweh to divide up the nations of the earth according to sons that don't even exist. Listen, to truly understand the Old Testament, you need to know what it describes and how it describes. That is its cosmic geographical worldview. This cosmic geographical worldview plays out particularly in the Old Testament because these cosmic geographical lines are drawn. They're drawn between all of these nations. Israel is on holy ground because it's Yahweh's inheritance. The lands around Israel, they belong to other gods, lesser spiritual beings created by Yahweh and hostile to Yahweh and his people, Israel. And the biblical backdrop for all of this is Genesis 11. That is that tower building story with the explanation that you find in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. Well, listen, that's kind of a quick overview of how these gods came into being, and I hope it's been helpful. I've shared this before, but one of the things I do is I repeat things again and again because all of us need to rehear. It takes time to absorb material. Listen, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been reading and rereading all of this for years, continually soaking myself in the truth of what the Bible is saying. Because I grew up in a generation, probably a generation before many of you, just by virtue of the fact that I'm older. I grew up in church. I grew up in Sunday school. I was in Sunday school every day of my life, and I heard all of the Bible stories. But I knew nothing of what I shared with you today. In fact, even as a young preacher back in my early days, through my 20s and 30s and even into my 40s, much of what I've shared with you today, I had never heard. It wasn't until about 15 years ago that I began to come across and begin to understand what is developing throughout the Old Testament with this idea of cosmic geography, or the cosmic geographical worldview that you see being played out not just in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament as well. And so I share this in hopes that you are beginning to grasp it as well. So I do hope that it's been helpful. If it has, take a moment and hit that like button. And if you've not yet subscribed to this channel, I would invite you to do so as well. And as always, I am so glad you've taken the time to watch this video. And I just simply want to say to you, God's very best to you.